You have one two-time two seed over the last two seasons go through some early season struggles, and people start losing their minds. Folks are trading away Jaren Jackson Jr., saying that he's mentally weak, trying to trade away half the roster so that Zach LaVine can come to the Memphis Grizzlies. There is so much to discuss on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We're going to lock in right now and get to the bottom of it, Damichael Cole and I.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a wild and wonderful Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, well rested, super glad that I did not stay up for that Los Angeles Lakers debacle of a basketball game.
You didn't miss anything. You didn't miss anything.
I promised that I watched it, as I usually do, the next morning, but I did not stay up for it, and I'm glad I didn't.
Joe, you watched that entire game the next morning. There's no way you watched that game.
I'll be honest. I fast forwarded through the commercials and I knew that there were some slow parts and I skipped some things. I did watch it. I did watch it, but I did not.
If you watched the fourth quarter, you're a madman. If you watched that,
I watched about half of the fourth quarter. I watched about half of it just because I checked the box score and I saw how the score lined up and I wanted to see if anybody did anything relatively well. So anyway, I watched a little bit. I'll be honest. I didn't watch the whole fourth, but I do. That is how I operate. I those late night games I do watch, because the Locked On Grizzlies audience expects a well-informed Joe Mullinax. They don't just want hot takes all the time. They want some nuance in their analysis, and that's what I'm known for, Damichael Cole. My nuanced takes. Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax. I'm a Grizzlies columnist, or the Grizzlies columnist, I guess, over at Bluff City Media, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Make sure you're following him on X if you don't already do so, at Damichael C. You can follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Jase Medical. Today's episode, again, with Jase Medical, you can empower yourself when you purchase a Jase Case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That is JASE medical.com. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Check us out over on YouTube. Hopefully you're an everydayer that comes and just makes us a part of your NBA content consumption each and every time a new episode of Locked On Grizzlies drops. Or if this is your first time, because you see that we're going to talk about the Grizzlies going and trying to get a Chicago Bull or two, hopefully you'll stick around and you'll stay with us. Subscribe, hit that download button, subscribe to the podcast or YouTube for the show. We're not going to talk about the Lakers game anymore. I know I wasn't here for the Lakers game breakdown. I thought you did a good job with that, partner. I just don't think that's worth our time.
Let's move on.
I do enjoy checking out Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. And I've been known over my 10 or so years covering the Grizzlies to be a bit of a fire starter over on that social media app. And I did it a couple of times on Wednesday. One topic that was a hot button topic, not just for the Grizzlies, but the NBA the last 72 hours or so, has been the Chicago Bulls and the impending blow up of the Bulls core of DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic. It's sounding more and more like those guys are not going to be in Chicago by the trade deadline.
Yeah.
So, of course, that gets the trade wheels turning here, Damichael. And since the Grizzlies have a nice little break, they don't play a game again until, I believe, Saturday.
Right.
So we don't have any other games to really break down or preview or anything along those lines. So on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Thursday, I'm going to give some trade ideas that we're going to discuss. And then I know tomorrow the script will be flipped. A rare trade GM appearance by Damichael Cole. And that'll be how we lead off our Friday edition of the show, which I'm very excited about. People hear me talk about trades all the time, but you, Damichael, that is going to be fascinating. So for me, if we're looking at the Bulls blowing it up and the Grizzlies obviously not blowing it up, even though they've had a slow start, if I were the Grizzlies, the sexy pick, the popular thing to do would be to go all in and go get Zach LaVine. And I think it's possible. I think they could throw 3 or 4 firsts and a lot of different bodies and contracts at the Bulls to make it work. But I question the fit next to Ja Morant. That's important to understand because Ja eventually will be back. And I also question whether or not that is the best use of the resources, considering I believe Zach LaVine, and this might be a little bit too into the weeds for some of our listeners, he's a Clutch client now, right? A member of
he's Clutch.
Rich Paul, if I'm correct with that.
He's recently signed to Clutch. That's important. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
That is important, and you'll probably go, you know more about it than me, so I'll let you go a little bit more in depth. But that probably means he'll likely be a Los Angeles Laker or a New York Knick or a member of the Miami Heat. Something like that is probably where LaVine's going to wind up. I'm more interested in guys like Patrick Williams, 6'7" combo forward that can do a little bit of everything, shoot the three, defend. Alex Caruso, people that are everydayers here at Locked On Grizzlies know how I love Alex Caruso.
You love him. You love him. You wanted him a lot in last February.
What's better than one Marcus Smart? Two Marcus Smarts. I think that would be pretty cool. So that's kind of where I'm at. DeMar DeRozan would be cool, but I think he's kind of at the tail end of his career. It's an expiring deal, so he'd be cheaper to acquire. Our friend Parker Fleming is really big in the Nikola Vucevic, big man that can score the basketball, would automatically make center a strength as opposed to, depending on Bismack Biyombo and Xavier Tillman. I'm kind of the mind that I would like to see them fortify the guys that theoretically will be around Ja Morant come spring and hopefully the play-in tournament, playoffs, whatever it comes down to for the Grizzlies. So for me, my targets would be Alex Caruso, Patrick Williams, with LaVine kind of being at the bottom of the list. Where are you at on
that? It makes sense. Those guys, you said Patrick Williams and Alex Caruso, but here's where I'm at. And I'll go deeper into it on tomorrow. But for today, this is my kind of synopsis of the Grizzlies situation.
Sure.
I always ask you questions before I lean into my point, because I feel like I can get you thinking how I'm thinking, Joe. And
you're good
and
at
this is how I'll do it. How many untouchable players do you say are on the Grizzlies roster?
Untouchable players. Well, we'll talk about one of them that apparently half of Grizzlies Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, thinks is very touchable.
Right.
Jaren Jackson Jr. is untouchable for me. Desmond Bane is untouchable for me. And Ja Morant. Those three.
Exactly.
To varying levels. Those are the guys that cannot be traded for unless it involves someone like Jason Tatum. Yeah, a mega star, which obviously isn't going to happen.
Yeah. See, we're thinking along the lines. That's where I am. Three guys. Before the season, we had that conversation. And remember, we threw out a couple other names as guys who, weren't quite untouchable, but we really saw a lot of value in. One of the names was Luke Kennard. And honestly, I think, his value is not what we thought it would be at the beginning of the season, because I've come to learn at this point, yes, Luke Kennard can shoot the crap out of the basketball, but against those teams like the Clippers, like the Lakers, I'm sure Boston is going to be the same kind of silk, but against those teams that can play top-notch defense and provide that physicality, he's going to struggle, and it just is what it is. Just got to get used to it. He's going to have those real good nights against some teams, and he's going to have nights where he can't get shots off. So with that being said, Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams, I like where you're going from the defensive standpoint, but here's my thing, Joe. I think you just got to go big or go home at this point. There isn't much more left, I think, for the Grizzlies in terms of these moves that'll move them from, mediocre to just above, the mediocre line. At this point, you're trying to win ships. Remember, Desmond Bane next year, his contract is going to be on the books. Ja Morant contract starts this season, his max deal. Jaren Jackson Jr. next summer, we're going to have to start having a conversation about a potential extension. So the money is about to drop a little bit, and this is the time you have to strike now. You can't just say, we're going to add Alex Caruso and we're going to make the defense a little bit better. And Patrick Williams, because I get it. Those guys do improve the Grizzlies, but where my mind is, with so much money committed to the stars, you got to think championship or bust. They aren't championship or bust for the Grizzlies in particular. Sure, Alex Caruso could go to Milwaukee and championship contender. But in Memphis, that's not the case, simply because I still think the Grizzlies need that bucket getter. They need that guy. It doesn't have to be these guys, but they need that Jordan Clarkson type. They need that Lou Will who can come in the game in the last 2-3 minutes and get in the pick and roll. And defense has really got to account for him and really is known as a professional scorer. They missed on a couple of those guys in recent drafts. We talk about the draft picks, right? A Jaden Hardy, a Cam Thomas, what he's been doing in Brooklyn. Those are the type of guys not have on the bunch of complementary players, guys who can play off of Ja, guys who can play off of Dez. Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams will make them better from a complementary player standpoint, but I don't think they move the needle enough for that star power. So in terms of star power, I would consider Zach LaVine. He still isn't the perfect fit for me, but I would consider him even more than the guys that you mentioned.
That's fascinating. You
just got to go hard at this point, Joe. You got to go for it.
I know you've got some trade ideas yourself that you'll share on tomorrow's show. That's a nice hook for our Friday episode. Looking forward to hearing those. I'm intrigued by the idea. If we assume that LaVine wants to go to New York, there's an Emmanuel Quickly kind of situation maybe that you could slide in on. Quentin Grimes is a good scoring wing that can also defend.
Not having a good year up there too. So
correct. So maybe you could get him for a little cheaper than you should. If the Heat want to move on from Tyler Hero, to be honest with you, if we're talking 6 men and that sort of thing, you talk about a bucket getter off the bench, or if you convince Marcus Smart to be that 6th man and, maybe Tyler Hero, the way that you do rotations, there's options. And again, to the credit of the front office that everybody is, enjoying trashing at the moment there in Memphis, Tennessee, they have flexibility to do whatever the heck they want. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next few months. There is some ridiculousness going on around Jaren Jackson Jr. on social media that I'm going to address. Again, I'm the one that gets fired up. Damichael's usually the one who plays it cool. I'm going to get a little fired up over the Jaren Jackson Jr. discourse. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season is in full swing, but of course the NFL is as well. You can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel? There is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use with a wide range of betting options, including things like spreads, player props, over-unders, the same game parlay, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off not just the NBA season, but the NFL season as well with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. I do something that Jaren Jackson Jr. doesn't need help with. I come to his defense next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Make sure you're checking him out on X at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. We're talking trades here these next couple of episodes. There's a lull in the Grizzlies schedule. Hopefully they're resting, getting healthy. Fingers crossed. Hopefully they are, maybe fielding some calls on trades. It's a good time for that. I'm guessing they're not, but it's always fun to talk about on these stretches of no games on the Locked On Podcast Network. Something else that's not fun to talk about is how, and again, this is a social media thing, and I want to stress that social media is very much an echo chamber, right? It certainly is not reflective of the entire fan base. There's people that listen to this show, watch it on YouTube, that aren't on social media. They have no idea what I'm about to talk about. But there is a section of Memphis Grizzlies fans that, for whatever reason, has very aggressively turned on Jaren Jackson Jr., saying that he is weak, that he gets punked, that he is not mentally tough. I saw one person, I want to stress it's one person, one person essentially say he was mentally like a child. Now, this is Damichael, the vice president of the NBPA, right? The National Basketball Players Association. This is arguably, the youngest is obviously very mature too. An extremely mature young person, by all accounts, a Renaissance man. He's passionate about fashion. He's passionate about music, and he's passionate about basketball. He's represented the United States at FIBA. He's improved as a basketball player. We mentioned the extension earlier in the show that he's going to be eligible for. In my opinion, he's going to get a max extension, and it's going to be with the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, that's going to be what happens. But if people online, some people, have their way, Jaren Jackson Jr. will be traded this season because he struggles against one of the best bigs in the NBA and Anthony Davis. Who doesn't struggle with Anthony Davis? Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. That's the list, right? So Anthony Davis is literally probably a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame caliber player. And
for sure.
After a poor performance, I'm not excusing that. I know you talked about it on yesterday's show. You went in depth about what's going on with Jaren and the issues he's had, not just against the Lakers, but in recent games in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
He remains, even with those current struggles, one of the top 10 or so young players in the NBA, if we're defining it by younger than 25. He remains one of the top 30 or so, in my opinion, players in the entire National Basketball Association. And there are 29 other teams in the NBA that would love to have Jaren Jackson Jr. on their team. So if you really want to make that trade, stop criticizing anything that Zach Kleiman and the Memphis Grizzlies front office does, because you are willing to give up on a literal 24-year-old who has already won Defensive Player of the Year, been an all-defensive player, has shown growth in his game just in this first 11 games of the season. He's shown development as a passer. He continues to get better. He's a wonderful representative of both the city and the franchise. It makes all the sense in the world to invest in this young man and not move on from him because he struggles against a Hall of Fame caliber big.
I'm in the same breath with you on this one, Joe. We talked about the untouchable guys on the roster in the first segment, and you said only for like a super mega star, and that's where I am. Jaren Jackson Jr. is an all-star player. He's 24 years old. You got him on. I mean, people complaining right now, but you have him on probably one of the best value deals for an all-star right now.
A bargain.
I mean, everyone else around him that's playing anywhere close to his level is max money right now. And that would have been that would be 3 max contracts for the Grizzlies. So him, he's kind of saving that team a lot of money. And he's playing at an all-star level. Going into that game yesterday a couple of days ago against the Lakers, you're talking about a guy who was averaging over 20 points a game for the first time in his career. I think he was at over 7 boards a game. And granted, again, I talked about last 3 games, 4 rebounds, 2 rebounds, 4 rebounds. Like, he's not being as forceful as we saw early in the season. We saw consecutive games with 7 or more boards. And I think the opponents have something to do with it, but that's part of the maturation process. We see it more with guards than bigs, actually. But we see it with the bigs too. And it's a physical transition, to the league. And with Jaren, I feel like when you watch him play, it feels like he's thinking as much as he's doing. And the reason I say that, because I pointed out in yesterday's episode how he has the move, the long 2-step Euro move that he constantly goes to.
Yep.
If you look at his drive chart, I think over 80% of his drives this season are to the left. This is the NBA. Everyone, you think LeBron James, when he was driving against him, and you could see it. I went back and rewatched some of the game. They are literally trying to shield him, tunnel him to the right, and he's still going left. And once he does that, it's just creating easy block opportunities for Anthony Davis. Like, Anthony Davis is letting them back up in the post. He knows exactly what shoulder that Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to shoot his shot over, and it's kind of predictable. So, again, I'm with you from the standpoint of, I know people are like, oh, it's year 6. It's year 6. Yes, it's year 6 for sure. But the only time I'll stop mentioning the fact, Jaren Jackson's age and things like that is when the improvement starts to become less notable. If you go from year 1 to year 2, year 3, I think he got hurt around that time, but then year 4, year 5, year 6, we've seen improvement every single season. Last year was the first time I personally was like, okay, he gets it. When he has a mismatch, he is going straight at their necks. That was the first time I seen him go straight into a guy's chest and dominate him. I think of that game against the Orlando Magic last year where he basically led the Grizzlies, and they put, I think, Paulo Banchero on him, and he realized, look, man, this too little, too small. He's a rookie. He can't mess with me. And that just, you didn't see enough of that in his first 4 or 5 years in the league. It was just flashes. But last season, he showed that. And this year, he's taken it to another level in terms of he's been very forceful and going to the rim. But now, we see that, okay, he's being forceful, but now you have to develop, different ways to attack. You're being forceful by going left every time and using that long Euro step and driving from the top of the key. You're being forceful from those ways. Now you got to add more variety, and that's what he's going to do over the course of his career. I think of Pascal Siakam, right? You remember when he first came up, he was a second fiddle to Kawhi Leonard, and then the year after Kawhi left, the Raptors were still pretty good. I don't remember if it was the second round or was it the Eastern Conference Finals. And they played the Boston Celtics in the bubble. And that series, went all the way. And Pascal Siakam was the star, but everyone knew where he was going because he'd go right and he'd try to post up the Celtics every single play. And they basically, eliminated him from that series. And looking at Siakam now, last year, the Grizzlies saw him when he was coming off a reigning Eastern Conference Player of the Week. Like his game has kind of developed a little bit more since then from being a one-move type of guy. That's where Jaren has to get to next.
That is the next step in his progression, the next step in his evolution as a basketball player. He is going to keep getting better. He's passionate. He loves Memphis. He wants to be in the city. And again, people don't want to hear it. You're from there, Damichael. You obviously live there now. I was only there for a short few years, but I obviously have stayed in touch with the city. I followed the city from afar. People that want to love Memphis, people that invest in the city, all the things that he does for women's sports, he is someone that is worth investing in, right? Yeah. And he is a person who will bring positive energy and positive momentum to the franchise. So he may not be coming along as fast as you want him to, but that is your problem. Like, he is getting better, and I'm with you, Damichael. Mm-hmm. He is going to continue to get patience from me.
Hey, an all-star at 23,
showing that improvement. 23-year-old all-star, right? Maybe we're putting him on too high of a pedestal, especially when he's without the guy that's supposed to be the best player on the team in John Morant, as we've talked about ad nauseum here on Locked On Grizzlies. When we come back on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about the defense, which is very offensive right now. How many more times are we going to talk about historically bad luck when it comes to teams making threes? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I don't know if you know this or not, Damichael, but Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Grizzlies will be on there every once in a while. You need to make sure you're going to go check it out. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by Jase Medical. Damichael, we've been together for a while now, over a year, right, in terms of our partnership. And, of course, our wonderful audience has been along for the ride with us here at Locked On Grizzlies. We're going to get a little bit more personal and talk a little bit more about what matters most, right, which is your health. Taking care of your health. Health is wealth, as everybody says, as you've probably heard before. It's important to invest in that in these uncertain times. Right now, you can go to jasemedical.com. You can receive a 12-month supply on most daily medications. Don't worry about natural disasters, unrest in the world. You can get access to peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med. Go to jasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off on your purchase. Don't forget that Jase Case as well. 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Use that Jase Case. Get with a board-certified physician through Jase Medical. Get ongoing care from physicians for any treatment and any treatment-related questions. This is doctor-created, doctor-recommended. Don't get caught unprepared. Check out jasemedical.com. Again, that is jasemedical.com. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. When we come back on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll finish out this Thursday edition of the show talking an offensive defense for Memphis. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, finishing out this Thursday edition of the podcast with my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am the Memphis Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media. Between the two of us and our various jobs that we have, you've come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies coverage. And, we've been talking trades, guys that aren't currently on the roster, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. We talked about Jaren Jackson Jr. and how he is getting an unfair shake of things, at least in my opinion. I don't want to speak for you, partner, but it sounds like we're on the same page. He's not the problem. Jaren Jackson Jr. is not the issue. perimeter defense is probably fair to say a major issue. And I know you talked about this on yesterday's show. The Lakers going ham from 3-point range, right?
An NBA record.
We have that conversation almost every single time the Memphis Grizzlies play. They get some sort of historic or season best performance from range from the opponent. I do think it's important to point out, by most statistical measures, and this is what Taylor Jenkins would say to you, I would imagine, if you asked him about it, this run of shooting is not going to continue, right? Mm-hmm. At least in theory. We keep saying that, but it keeps happening.
It keeps happening.
It's improbable. It's possible, but it's improbable that teams will keep shooting this well against the Grizzlies. However, there's no denying, as we've seen throughout the last couple of years, even when Memphis is having success, there are issues defending the perimeter at times with overhelping, cutting off passing lanes that aren't necessary, stopping penetration off the dribble that isn't there. We talked about this a little bit throughout the season, but it's going to continue to be a problem. The Lakers destroying this team from beyond the arc the way that they did, me rewatching the game, looking at the numbers, it shouldn't have gone down that way. If it was Anthony Davis, LeBron James, guys just crushing them in the paint because they're undersized, that would have made a lot more sense. Death by three-pointer to that Lakers team is concerning.
Here's the thing. I think I have not a solution, but an idea.
I would love to hear ideas
to why this has been happening. So I took a deeper look into the stats, right, Joe? And what I saw was the Grizzlies, they're not leaving guys open at some alarming rate. It's not like they're ranked at the bottom of the league in terms of giving up the most open three-point attempts.
Sure.
They're in the middle of the pack.
That's fair.
But on those open three-pointers, teams are shooting better against the Grizzlies pretty much than any other team in the NBA. I think it's like 28, 29, 30. Like the Grizzlies are near the bottom of the NBA in terms of percentage giving up on open three-pointers. So there is, some truth to what you said in terms of teams are probably going to regress to the mean a little bit more because at the end of the day, when they're leaving guys open, they're making them. But so this is what I believe. And this is kind of what I think I've seen as well. Because Taylor Jenkins, when he talks about this, he kind of gets into the KYP conversation, knowing your personnel, knowing who to close out slow on, who to stay attached to at all times, and who to leave wide open. So I think the Rui Hachimura case, that's the case study for the Grizzlies in this conversation. They dared him, left him completely open last year, game one of that playoff series, I think it was.
Absolutely.
And he knocked one down. Then he knocked two down. And then they finally started to close out a little bit more. But by that point, he was hot. And I think that's what we're seeing. We saw Grant Williams in that Dallas game. Like he was getting some open looks. And then at that point, it's one dribble pump fake. Boom, it's going in. Like I don't need much space now. Like I feel good. So I think there has to be a higher sense of urgency on guys at the beginning of the game, even going to this Lakers game, right? LeBron James, when he in that first quarter, I think his first couple 3-point attempts, he just walked into him. He was guarded by Jaren, and Jaren was giving him space or whatever. And he's just, how LeBron just casually dribbles and just walks into the three-pointer. So he's walking into the looks. I think same thing with D'Angelo Russell. He kind of walked casually into a couple looks. And then after that, you get Austin Reeves just dribbling, just pulling up and hitting three-pointers. What can I do about that? Same thing with Lauri Markkanen. I think if you go back to that first game against the Jazz, his first attempt or his first two attempts open. After that, now you're talking about a 7-footer that's one of the best shooters in the game. He's already seen the ball go in. So I think, again, and this all goes to, these first halves that we're seeing, right? 3 times the Grizzlies have given up 70 points or more in the first half this season. I don't think they did that 3 times all of last season, in total. So with that being said, I think there just has to be a higher sense of urgency earlier in the game. But this defense, again, you can agree with it or not. But what we've kind of been led to believe to see, you go to the Rui Hachimura case, you go to a lot of these other guys, Derrick Jones Jr. is another example. The Grizzlies have a fold your arms, we'll believe it when we see it type mindset when a lot of these guys shoot three-pointers and then they knock them down. And it's like, oh, he can shoot today. We got to guard him. Too late then.
Yeah, NBA players are creatures of habit. I know you know that, going to all the practices and shoot-arounds you see. A lot of muscle memory. All they need is to feel that stroke once or twice, and it becomes almost automatic for any NBA player, right? They're the best 450 or so NBA or basketball players on the planet for a reason. And once they feel that rhythm that the Grizzlies are allowing them to get into, it creates problems, and it creates spacing issues, cuts, backdoor cuts, things off of screens. Offenses open up when guys like Rui Hachimura and Derek Jones Jr. are able to create that room, and you have to start respecting it. So hopefully Taylor Jenkins makes some adjustments. That is a very fair place of criticism for him. You know, I get the reputation of just accepting Taylor Jenkins' warts and all. I like Taylor Jenkins. I think he's a good coach, but I also think he's not above criticism. This is a major hole in his scheme right now. Teams see it, right? They understand it. They are game planning for it. There has to be a counterpunch that gets developed. And we'll see how that happens here over the next several games. 2-9. I think I've pointed out on social media, the Grizzlies, as of this recording, are only 4 games out of the 6th seed, 2.5 games away from the play-in. So the Western Conference is jumbled as predicted, and there's going to be chances for them to make runs, but they got to figure this out here. You know, you don't want to be 8-17 when John Morant returns. That might be a gap that's too big to cover. So they got to kind of find a way to go 500-ish over these last John Morant games, like we kind of talked about on a recent episode of the show. It's only going to get tougher schedule-wise from here. Thank you guys so much. Wherever you're checking out the show, on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. And hey, shout out to our everydayers, folks that come each and every time a new episode drops. We appreciate you so much. I know Damichael does. I do as well. Our show continues to grow. We're nearing that 3,000 subscriber mark, which would be a great thing for us to hit here in the next several days. So make sure you're spreading the word, spreading the good news that is Locked On Grizzlies. And thanks to everybody that has joined us as a subscriber, especially on YouTube, but wherever you get podcasts, it's appreciated. The next time we're on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael, as we talked about, you're going to give some trade ideas. I know it's an Eastern Conference kind of feel, but maybe a different squad that we're not talking about as much.
I think there's another team out there that has, maybe 2 or 3 pieces. So I can't wait to talk to you about this, because you're the trade guy. So when I talk trades with you, I get excited when I talk trades with you. So 2 or 3 guys from another team, I think it'll make a lot of sense to the fans. And I can't wait to see what you guys think as well, because I put some thought into this. So don't just shut me down immediately now. I put some thought into this.
I would never do that. You know that. I would never do that. They'll shut me down in the YouTube comments and elsewhere, but they love you, Damichael, and rightfully so. So I look forward to hearing Damichael's ideas, and obviously we'll take you into the weekend with some other wonderful Memphis Grizzlies topics. Before we go, we want to remind you guys of Locked On launching the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Go check out Locked On Sports today, covering the top sports stories, local experts from Locked On shows like ours here at Locked On Grizzlies, plus the national shows that cover every league. Again, Locked On Sports today on YouTube. Subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Hopefully you're already subscribed to Locked On Grizzlies, your daily content spot when it comes to Grizzlies basketball. We'll be back for our Friday edition of the show. Until then, for Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Have a good one.